Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. Those words spoken by my own daughter at my husband's funeral would either destroy me or forge me into something unbreakable. Today I'm going to tell you exactly how the woman who threw me out like garbage learned that underestimating a grieving mother was the biggest mistake of her life. Stay with me until the end of this story, and please comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far my truth has traveled across the world. The rain hadn't stopped falling since we lowered Robert into the ground 3 days ago. It drummed against the windows of what I still foolishly called our home, with the same relentless rhythm that had been pounding in my chest since the moment the doctors told me there was nothing more they could do. 47 years of marriage, and I was supposed to just, what? Figure out how to exist without the man who had been my anchor, my compass, my everything. I was sitting in Robert's old leather chair, the one Vanessa had always complained about calling it that hideous relic, when I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor with that particular cadence that meant business. My daughter had inherited Robert's height and my stubborn streak, but somewhere along the way she'd developed a coldness that neither of us had ever possessed. Mother, we need to talk. I looked up from the photo album I'd been clutching. Wedding pictures, vacations, snapshots, images of Vanessa as a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. When had that sweet child transformed into this stranger who looked at me like I was an inconvenience? Of course, sweetheart, sit with me. I was just looking at, this isn't a social call. Vanessa remained standing, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her Hermes bag. At 32, my daughter had achieved everything she'd ever wanted: a successful marriage to David, a pharmaceutical executive, a stunning home in the hills, a lifestyle that screamed success. But looking at her now, I realized I barely recognized the woman she'd become. I don't understand. Vanessa sighed, the kind of exaggerated exhale she used to give me as a teenager when I'd ask about her homework. Mother, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Daddy's gone. The funeral's over. It's time to face reality. Something cold crept up my spine. What reality? This house, Mother. It's worth $3.2 million. David and I have been looking at it for months, and frankly, it's exactly what we need. The mortgage is paid off. The neighborhood is perfect for when we start having children. And she paused, studying her reflection in the black screen of her phone. Well, you don't really need all this space anymore, do you? I felt like I was underwater, her words reaching me through some thick, distorting medium. Vanessa, this is my home. Your father and I built our life here. All of our memories are just that, memories. She finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in her eyes made my blood turn to ice. Mother, I'm not trying to be cruel, but let's be practical. You're 71 years old. You can't maintain a house this size. You don't drive at night anymore. You haven't worked in decades. What exactly is your plan here? My plan. I struggled to my feet, the photo album tumbling to the floor. Pictures scattered across the rug, Robert teaching Vanessa to ride a bike, family Christmas mornings, her high school graduation. My plan is to grieve my husband in the home we shared for 4 decades. Vanessa's laugh was sharp, humorless. With what money, Mother? What are you talking about? The life insurance barely covers the funeral expenses. Daddy's medical bills ate through most of your savings. The house might be paid off, but property taxes alone are $28,000 a year. Utilities, maintenance, groceries. Do you have any idea what it costs to live? I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Robert handled our finances, but we were comfortable. We have the retirement accounts, his pension. Had, Mother. Past tense. Vanessa's voice was getting sharper, more impatient. Medical bankruptcy is more common than you think. Cancer treatments aren't cheap. Experimental therapies, private rooms, round-the-clock care, it all adds up. My legs felt weak. I sank back into Robert's chair, surrounded by our scattered memories. But surely there's something left. The lawyer said, The lawyer said exactly what I'm telling you now. You're broke, Mother. Completely, utterly broke. Vanessa crouched down and began gathering the photos, but her movements were rough, careless. David and I have talked it over, and we're prepared to make you an offer. An offer. We'll buy the house from you for fair market value, $3.2 million. You can take that money, buy a nice little condo somewhere affordable, maybe Arizona or Florida, and actually enjoy your golden years instead of worrying about bills you can't pay. I watched my daughter stack our family photos like a deck of cards, and something inside me began to fracture. Vanessa, I don't want to move to Arizona. I want to stay here. This is where your father and I. Daddy's dead mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. He's not coming back. Clinging to this house isn't going to change that. How can you be so cold? He was your father. Vanessa stood abruptly, the photos in her hands. And he's gone. I'm trying to help you face reality before you end up on the street. Do you want to be one of those old women digging through garbage cans? Because that's where you're headed if you don't make some smart decisions right now. I need time to think. There is no time. Vanessa's voice was rising now, and I could see David hovering in the doorway behind her. How long had he been listening? The bank is going to start foreclosure proceedings within 60 days. The creditors are circling like vultures. You can either sell to us and walk away with enough money to live comfortably, or you can dig in your heels and lose everything. I looked past her to David, hoping to see some compassion, some recognition of how devastating this conversation was for me. But his face was blank, unreadable. This wasn't just my daughter's idea, it was theirs. A joint decision, a business transaction. What if I refuse? Vanessa's eyes hardened. Then you'll learn what it's like to be homeless at 71. Is that really what you want? Mother, is your pride worth starving for? The room fell silent except for the rain and the ticking of the grandfather clock Robert had bought for our 25th anniversary. I could feel my world reshaping itself around me. Everything I'd thought was solid and permanent suddenly revealed as fragile as spun glass. I need to see the paperwork, I said finally. I need to understand exactly what you're talking about. Of course. Vanessa's smile was bright, triumphant. David has everything organized. We can go over it all tonight if you want, or tomorrow morning if you prefer. But Mother, she reached out and touched my shoulder, and her fingers felt cold even through my sweater. Try to remember that we're doing this because we love you, because we want what's best for you. After they left, I sat in the growing darkness surrounded by scattered photographs and tried to understand how my life had changed so completely in the space of an hour. 3 days ago, I'd been Margaret Hayes, wife of 47 years, mother, grandmother-to-be, a woman with a history and a place in the world. Now I was apparently destitute, homeless, dependent on my daughter's charity for survival. I picked up one of the photos from the floor. Vanessa at 8 years old, missing front teeth, chocolate cake smeared across her cheek from her birthday party. Robert and I had thrown her such elaborate celebrations back then. Princess themes, pony rides, magicians who pulled rabbits from hats. We'd wanted her to feel special, beloved, secure in the knowledge that she was the center of our universe. Where had that little girl gone? When had love transformed into calculation? The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed our family lawyer's office, James Morrison, who'd handled Robert's will and our estate planning for the past 15 years. Mrs. Hayes, I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to check in and see how you're managing. His voice was warm, familiar, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Hello, James. I'm struggling, honestly. That's completely understandable. Losing Robert was a shock to all of us. He was a good man. Yes, he was. I found myself crying again, tears that seemed to have no bottom. James, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Of course. How bad is it financially, I mean? Vanessa was here tonight, and she's telling me we're bankrupt, that I'm going to lose the house, that Robert's medical bills consumed everything we had. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Hayes, I think there might be some confusion. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'd like to go over everything with you in detail. Something in his tone made my heart skip. What kind of confusions? The kind that's better discussed in person. Can you be here at 10? James, please, I need to know, is what Vanessa told me true? Another pause. No, Margaret. It's not true. Not even close. I dropped the phone. The next morning, I sat in James Morrison's office clutching a cup of coffee I couldn't seem to stop spilling and trying to process what he was telling me. The numbers he was showing me didn't match anything Vanessa had said. Not even close. Robert was incredibly thorough with his estate planning. James was explaining sliding documents across his desk. The life insurance alone is worth $1.2 million. His retirement accounts properly managed should generate enough income for you to live very comfortably for the rest of your life. The house is completely paid off and there's an additional $800,000 in various investment accounts. I stared at the papers, the numbers swimming before my eyes. But the medical bills were covered almost entirely by insurance. Robert made sure of that. There are some outstanding expenses, maybe $12,000 total, but nothing that would create any kind of financial hardship. I don't understand. Why would Vanessa tell me we were broke? James leaned back in his chair, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. Margaret, I've been practicing law for 35 years. I've seen a lot of families go through a lot of difficult situations. Sometimes grief makes people confused about what's best for everyone involved. You think she's confused? I think your daughter may have gotten some incorrect information about your financial situation, or he paused. Well, sometimes adult children worry about their parents' ability to manage large sums of money. They mean well, but they make decisions based on assumptions rather than facts. I thought about Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails, her designer handbag, the way she looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. She wants to buy the house from me for fair market value, she said, at $3.2 million. That's what she quoted. James pulled out another folder. Recent comparable sales in your neighborhood suggest the house is worth closer to $4.8 million, maybe 5 with the right updates. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering against the floor. Hot liquid splashed across my shoes, but I barely noticed. $5 million. Your neighborhood has appreciated significantly over the past decade. Robert always said that house would be your retirement security, and he was right. I stared at the broken cup, watching coffee seep into the expensive carpet, and felt something shifting inside me. Not grief this time, but something sharper. Something that felt almost like anger. James, I need you to help me understand something. If what you're telling me is true, if I'm actually financially secure, why would my daughter lie to me? Why would she tell me I was broke and try to convince me to sell my home? I can't speculate about your daughter's motivations, Margaret, but I can tell you this, you have options. Many options. You don't have to sell anything you don't want to sell, and you certainly don't have to move anywhere you don't want to live. I thought about the scattered photographs on my living room floor, about the coldness in Vanessa's eyes, about the way David had stood silently in the doorway, watching his wife dismantle my life piece by piece. What if I wanted to see Robert's will, the actual document, not just the summary? Of course, though I should mention there's something else we need to discuss, a provision Robert insisted on that I haven't had a chance to explain yet. What kind of provision? James opened another folder thicker than the others. Robert was very concerned about your welfare after he was gone. He loved Vanessa, but he wasn't blind to some of her tendencies. He wanted to make sure you were protected. Protected from what? From people who might try to take advantage of your grief. Robert set up what's called a conditional inheritance clause. Vanessa was supposed to receive a substantial inheritance, $10 million, but only if certain conditions were met. My hands were shaking as I reached for the document. What conditions? that she treat you with dignity and respect during your time of mourning, that she support you emotionally and practically as you adjust to life without Robert, that she honor your autonomy and your right to make your own decisions about where and how you want to live. I read the words, but they seemed to be floating on the page. And if she doesn't meet those conditions, then her inheritance reverts to you, all of it, along with everything else Robert left behind. The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of James's desk and tried to breathe. How much total, I mean? $33 million, Margaret. Your husband was a very wealthy man and a very careful one. He wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone for anything. I thought about Vanessa's voice the night before, find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. I thought about her hands roughly gathering our family photos. I thought about the way she'd looked at me, not like her mother, but like an obstacle. James, I said quietly, I think we need to have a much longer conversation. That afternoon, I drove home through streets that looked exactly the same but felt completely different. Every house, every tree, every familiar landmark was suddenly charged with new meaning. I wasn't a broke widow dependent on my daughter's charity. I was a woman with options, with power, with the resources to make my own choices about my own life. But more than that, I was a woman who'd been lied to, manipulated, betrayed by the person I loved most in the world. I parked in my driveway, my house, my choice, and sat for a moment looking at the home Robert and I had built together. The roses he'd planted for our anniversary were still blooming along the front walk. The porch swing where we'd spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing still swayed gently in the breeze. This wasn't just a house. It was our life, our history, our love made tangible in brick and wood and carefully tended gardens, and Vanessa had been willing to take it all away from me based on a lie. My phone buzzed with a text message. Mother David found a lovely condo complex in Scottsdale, 3-bedroom, 2-bath pool golf course. Perfect for your needs. Can we look at the listing tonight? V. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed it back. We need to talk. Can you come over around 7? The response came immediately. Of course. So exciting that you're ready to move forward. David has some papers for you to sign. Papers to sign. Of course he did. I spent the rest of the afternoon in Robert's study reading through every document James had given me. The will, the insurance policies, the investment statements, the detailed breakdown of assets I hadn't even known existed. Robert had been protecting me even from the grave, anticipating threats I'd never imagined could come from our own daughter. At exactly 7 o'clock, I heard Vanessa's heels on the front walk. Through the window, I watched her and David approach the door, both of them carrying briefcases, both wearing the kind of satisfied expressions that suggested they thought tonight would be the culmination of their plan. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Mother, you look better today. More accepting. Vanessa kissed my cheek, and I noticed she smelled like expensive perfume and something else, something that reminded me of the anxiety sweat from her college exam days. David brought everything we discussed. We can have you moved out by the end of the month if we work quickly. Actually, I said, stepping aside to let them in, I think there's been some confusion about my financial situation. Vanessa and David exchanged a glance, quick but not quick enough for me to miss. What do you mean, Mother? I mean, I spoke with James Morrison today, at length, about Robert's will, about our assets, about exactly what my financial situation really looks like. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Oh, well, good. I'm sure he explained how complicated these things can be, how easy it is for people to misunderstand. He explained that I'm worth over $30 million. The briefcase slipped from David's hand, hitting the floor with a loud thump. Mother, that's not, I mean, there are debts and taxes, and no, Vanessa, there aren't. I walked to Robert's chair and sat down looking up at my daughter and her husband. There are no debts beyond $12,000 in medical bills. There are no foreclosure proceedings. There's no financial crisis. The only crisis here is that my daughter has been lying to me. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was trying to protect you. From what? From being financially secure, from living in my own home, from making my own decisions. I stood up, and for the first time in days, I felt like myself again. Strong, clear, angry. Or were you trying to protect yourself from the possibility that I might actually read your father's will? What are you talking about? The conditional inheritance clause, Vanessa. The $10 million your father left you contingent on how you treated me during my grief. David grabbed Vanessa's arm, his face pale. We should go. No, I said firmly. We should finish this conversation right here, right now. I looked directly at my daughter, this stranger who looked like the little girl I'd raised but had somehow become someone I didn't recognize. Tell me, Vanessa, when you decided to lie to me about being broke, when you planned to trick me into selling my house for $2 million less than it's worth, when you told me to find somewhere else to die. Did it occur to you that your father might have anticipated something like this? Vanessa was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration of a plan falling apart. You don't understand the pressure we're under, Mother. David's company is restructuring. We have our own mortgage, our own bills, so you thought you'd solve your financial problems by stealing my home and my inheritance. We weren't stealing anything. We were trying to help you, by lying to me, by telling me I was broke when I'm actually wealthy, by convincing me I had no choice but to depend on your charity. I shook my head, feeling something cold and final settling in my chest. That's not help, Vanessa. That's fraud. David stepped forward, his businessman smile slipping into place. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we should all sit down, have a calm conversation about what's really best for everyone. What's best for everyone, I interrupted, is the truth. And the truth is that my daughter tried to con me out of my home and my inheritance 3 days after I buried my husband. Mother, please. The truth is that she forged documents to make me think I was broke. Vanessa's tears stopped abruptly. I never forged anything. Then where did you get the financial information you quoted to me? The specific numbers about foreclosure proceedings and creditor problems, because according to James Morrison, none of those things exist. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see Vanessa's mind working, searching for an explanation that wouldn't damn her further. We made some assumptions, David said finally, based on general knowledge about medical costs. And towards you made assumptions, or you made plans. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I think you both need to leave now. Mother, wait. I'm not your mother right now, Vanessa. Right now, I'm a woman who just discovered that the people she trusted most in the world were plotting against her. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the daughter I'd raised. I need time to think, to decide what I'm going to do about this. What you're going to do. Vanessa's tears had turned to something harder, more desperate. Mother, you can't be serious. We're family. We made a mistake, but we can work this out. Can we? Because right now I'm trying to figure out when exactly you stopped being my daughter and started being someone who could look a grieving widow in the eye and tell her she was worthless. David was pulling Vanessa toward the door, whispering urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. Fine, she said, her voice sharp and ugly. Fine, Mother. Keep your precious house. Keep your money. But don't come crying to me when you're rattling around in this mausoleum all alone talking to pictures of Daddy and wondering why nobody visits anymore. Vanessa, David hissed. No, David. She wants to know who I really am. She wants the truth. Vanessa turned back to me and the mask was completely off now. The truth is that I'm tired of pretending to care about your feelings. I'm tired of visiting and listening to the same stories about the good old days. I'm tired of waiting for you to die so we can finally get what we deserve. The words hit me like physical blows, but I didn't flinch. I just stood there memorizing her face, burning this moment into my memory so I'd never forget what my daughter was really capable of. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For finally being honest, for showing me exactly who you are when you think I'm too weak to fight back." I smiled, and it felt like ice forming in my veins. "Your father was right to protect me from you. He knew you better than I did." Vanessa started to speak, then seemed to realize she'd already said too much. She grabbed David's hand and headed for the door, but turned back one last time. "You'll regret this, Mother. When you're sitting here alone on Christmas morning, when you're sick and need someone to take care of you, when you realize that money can't buy you a family, you'll regret throwing away the only people who actually cared about you." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll never regret finding out the truth." After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to their car pull out of my driveway and disappear into the night. The house was quiet except for the grandfather clock and the sound of my own breathing. I walked back to Robert's chair and sat down among the scattered photographs. But this time, instead of seeing them as evidence of loss, I saw them as proof of love, real love, the kind Robert and I had shared, the kind we'd thought we were giving our daughter. I picked up the photo of 8-year-old Vanessa with chocolate cake on her face and studied it carefully. That little girl was gone. Maybe she'd never really existed except in my imagination. Maybe the seeds of what Vanessa had become tonight were always there, and Robert and I had simply been too blinded by love to see them. But Robert had seen eventually. He'd known what Vanessa might do when grief made me vulnerable. He'd planned for this exact scenario, this exact betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Morrison asked me to contact you. Could we arrange a meeting tomorrow morning? There are some things we need to discuss regarding potential fraud in your case." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Yes, what time works for you?" The response came quickly. "9 a.m. at the station, if that's convenient. And Mrs. Hayes, please don't discuss this conversation with anyone until we've had a chance to talk." I set the phone aside and looked around the living room where Robert and I had spent so many peaceful evenings. Tomorrow I would start the process of holding my daughter accountable for what she'd tried to do to me. Tomorrow I would begin to understand just how elaborate her deception had been. But tonight, for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt like myself again, not a victim, not a confused old woman dependent on others for survival. I was Margaret Hayes. I was wealthy, I was intelligent, and I was angry. And I was just getting started. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's face when she'd finally dropped her mask, the cold calculation, the barely concealed contempt, the way she'd looked at me like I was already dead and just taking up space. By 5 a.m., I gave up pretending I could rest and made coffee in the kitchen where Robert used to surprise me with breakfast on Sunday mornings. Detective Sarah Chen was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and the kind of direct handshake that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Her office at the Financial Crimes Unit was sparse, a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with certificates and commendations that spoke to someone who took her job seriously. "Mrs. Hayes, I want you to know that everything we discuss here is confidential." She began settling into her chair with a thick folder in front of her. "Mr. Morrison contacted us because he's concerned about some irregularities in how your financial situation has been presented to you." Irregularities. I gripped my purse tighter, still processing that this conversation was actually happening. "You mean lies?" Detective Chen's expression didn't change. "Let's start with what you were told versus what's actually true. Mr. Morrison shared copies of the documents your daughter showed you. Can you walk me through that conversation?" I recounted everything: Vanessa's claims about bankruptcy, the alleged foreclosure proceedings, the pressure to sell immediately. As I spoke, Detective Chen took notes, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. "Mrs. Hayes, the documents your daughter used to support her claims, do you still have copies?" "She didn't leave copies with me. She said David would bring the paperwork later. but they never came back with anything official. Detective Chen opened her folder and slid several papers across the desk. These are the documents Mr. Morrison believes your daughter may have shown you based on your description. Take a look and tell me if they seem familiar. I studied the papers, my heart sinking as I recognized the letterheads, the official language, the specific numbers Vanessa had quoted. Yes, this looks exactly like what she showed me. The foreclosure notice, the creditor statements, where did you get these? We didn't get them anywhere, Mrs. Hayes. We created them. These are mock-ups based on your description. Detective Chen leaned forward. The companies listed on these documents don't exist. The case numbers don't correspond to any actual legal proceedings. The bank routing numbers are invalid. My hands started shaking. She made these up. Someone did. These documents are sophisticated enough to fool most people at first glance, but they're complete fabrications. Creating false legal documents is a serious crime, Mrs. Hayes. It's forgery, fraud, and potentially elder abuse. The room felt like it was tilting. Elder abuse. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Your daughter waited until you were at your most vulnerable 3 days after your husband's funeral and used fabricated documents to pressure you into making a major financial decision. That meets the legal definition. I thought about Vanessa's impatience, the way she'd refused to give me time to think, the urgency she'd manufactured around a crisis that didn't exist. How long would something like this take to prepare? Detective Chen's expression grew grimmer. Given the level of detail, several weeks, maybe months. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, Mrs. Hayes. This was a planned operation. The coffee I'd drunk that morning turned bitter in my stomach. While Robert was dying, while I was caring for him, watching him suffer, she was planning this. We can't prove timing yet, but the sophistication suggests significant advanced planning. Detective Chen pulled out another document. There's something else. Your daughter's husband works in pharmaceuticals, correct? David's a vice president at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. Why? Because Morrison Pharmaceuticals has been under federal investigation for the past 18 months. Price-fixing, insurance fraud, kickback schemes. The company's stock has lost 60% of its value, and there are rumors of mass layoffs coming. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. They need money. They need money badly. David's stock options are worthless. His job is likely gone within 6 months, and they've been living well beyond their means for years. Detective Chen slid another paper toward me. This is their mortgage statement, which we obtained through legal channels. They're 4 months behind on payments for a $3.2 million home. I stared at the numbers, remembering Vanessa's casual mention of wanting my house for when they started having children. So they decided to steal mine. It appears so, but Mrs. Hayes, what they attempted goes beyond simple theft. If you had signed over your house based on these fraudulent documents, you would have been left essentially homeless while they profited from your displacement. That's not just fraud, it's a form of identity theft that could have destroyed your life. What happens now? By Detective Chen closed the folder. That depends partly on you. We have enough evidence to proceed with charges, forgery, elder, abuse, fraud, conspiracy, but I need to know if you're prepared for what that means. Your daughter and son-in-law will be arrested. There will be a trial. This will be public, and it will be difficult. I thought about Vanessa's parting words, her threat that I'd end up alone on Christmas morning. Then I thought about Robert, about the careful provisions he'd made to protect me from exactly this situation. Detective Chen, if I don't pursue this, what's to stop them from trying again? What's to stop them from doing this to someone else? Nothing. In fact, our investigation suggests this may not be their first attempt at financial fraud. My blood went cold. What do you mean? David's elderly father died 6 months ago. The family claimed he'd spent his entire inheritance on medical care, but we're finding irregularities there too. Similar patterns, pressure to make quick decisions, documents that don't quite check out. Oh my God. Mrs. Hayes, people who do this don't usually stop with one victim. They perfect their techniques and they escalate. If we don't intervene now, there will be others. I closed my eyes and saw Robert's face the day he'd updated his will, how serious he'd been about protecting me. He'd known. Somehow he'd known exactly what Vanessa was capable of. What do you need me to do? First, we need you to document everything, every conversation, every document they showed you, every pressure tactic they used. Then we need to set up a controlled meeting. A controlled meeting? Detective Chen smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. We need them to incriminate themselves on tape. Are you up for that, Mrs. Hayes? 2 days later, I sat in my living room with a wire taped to my chest and Detective Chen's voice in my earpiece, waiting for my daughter to arrive. The plan was simple: get Vanessa and David to discuss their fabricated documents, their knowledge of my actual financial situation, and their intentions regarding the house. Just remember, Detective Chen's voice whispered through the tiny speaker, let them do most of the talking. Ask questions, but don't accuse. Act confused, not confrontational. My hands were trembling as I heard the familiar click of heels on my front walk. Through the window, I could see both Vanessa and David approaching, and something about their body language looked different, more cautious, less confident than before. I opened the door before they could knock. Vanessa, David, Mother. Vanessa's kiss on my cheek felt performative, like she was going through the motions. You look tired. Are you sleeping? Not much. I gestured toward the living room. Please sit down. We need to talk. David remained standing, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for something. Margaret, before we start, I want to apologize for the other night. Emotions were running high, and I think we all said things we didn't mean. Did we? I settled into Robert's chair, trying to project confusion rather than anger, because I've been thinking about what you both told me, and I'm still having trouble understanding how we went from comfortable to bankrupt so quickly. Vanessa perched on the edge of the sofa, her designer handbag clutched in her lap. Mother, I know this is overwhelming. Daddy always handled the finances, so it makes sense that you're confused about the details. I'm confused about more than details, sweetheart. I'm confused about the whole situation. I leaned forward, adopting what I hoped looked like a vulnerable posture. Could you show me those documents again? The foreclosure notice, the creditor statements, I'd like to understand them better. David and Vanessa exchanged a look that lasted several seconds too long. Of course, David said finally, though I should mention some of the situation has evolved since we last spoke. Evolved how? Well, for instance, we've been in touch with some of the creditors, and it appears there may have been some clerical errors in the initial assessments. I felt Detective Chen's words in my ear. He's backing off. Push gently. Clerical errors. Vanessa jumped in, her voice pitched higher than usual. What David means is that the financial picture isn't quite as dire as we initially thought. There are still serious concerns, of course, but maybe not as urgent as we feared. So I'm not going to lose the house. Well, no, probably not immediately. Probably not. I let genuine distress creep into my voice. Vanessa, you told me I had 60 days before foreclosure. Now you're saying probably not. Which is it? David moved to the window, his back to us. Margaret, the real issue isn't immediate bankruptcy. It's long-term financial security. Even if you can maintain the house short-term, is this really where you want to be in 5 years? 10 years. This is my home, David. It's where Robert and I built our life together. But it's also a burden, Vanessa said, and I could hear the edge creeping back into her voice, despite her obvious efforts to stay calm. Mother, you're 71 years old. This house is too big, too expensive, too much maintenance for someone in your position. My position, your situation, a widow living alone with limited income. Limited how? I interrupted. You keep talking about my financial problems, but I still don't understand the specifics. Robert had life insurance, didn't he? And his pension. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Through my earpiece, Detective Chen whispered, "Perfect. Keep going." David turned from the window, his expression carefully controlled. Margaret, I think there's been some miscommunication about the extent of your resources. What kind of miscommunication? When we discussed your financial situation the other night, we were working with preliminary information. The full picture is more complex. I felt a surge of anger, but forced myself to maintain the confused widow act. More complex how Vanessa was fidgeting with her handbag strap, winding it around her fingers. Mother, the truth is, you're not completely broke, but you're not wealthy either. There's enough to get by, but not enough to maintain this lifestyle indefinitely. What lifestyle? I live quietly, I don't spend extravagantly. This house costs $40,000 a year just in property taxes and utilities, David interrupted. Insurance, maintenance, landscaping, you're looking at 80,000 annually just to keep the doors open. And your income is what, maybe 60,000 a year from Social Security and Robert's pension, Vanessa added. Mother, the math doesn't work. I let myself look genuinely worried. So what you're saying is I might not be able to afford to stay here. Exactly. Vanessa leaned forward, and I could see relief in her eyes at my apparent acceptance. But that's why our offer is so perfect. You sell to us at fair market value, use that money to buy something more appropriate, and you'll actually come out ahead financially. Fair market value, I repeated, which you said was 3.2 million. David nodded. That's the current assessment, yes. Through my earpiece, Detective Chen's voice was sharp. That's perjury. The current assessment is 4.8 million. And you're sure that's accurate? I asked. Because I'd hate to sell for less than the house is actually worth. Margaret, we've done extensive research, David assured me. 3.2 is fair, maybe even generous given the current market. Generous how? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Mother, the housing market is unpredictable right now. Values could drop at any time. By offering you current market value, we're protecting you from potential losses, while also ensuring you get the house you want for your growing family, I said gently. That's secondary to helping you, Vanessa said quickly. Our main concern is your welfare. Of course. I smiled at my daughter, marveling at how easily the lies came to her. And the paperwork you mentioned, the documents that show the financial problems. David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Like I said, some of that information has been revised. The important thing is moving forward with a plan that makes sense for everyone. But I'd still like to see the original documents, I pressed, just to understand what we were dealing with before the revisions. Mother, those papers are outdated now, Vanessa said impatiently. Why dwell on information that's no longer relevant? Because I want to understand how close I came to losing everything. If you hadn't stepped in to help me, what would have happened? The room fell silent. I watched my daughter's face, seeing the calculation behind her eyes as she tried to figure out how to answer without admitting to the fabricated documents. You would have figured it out eventually, David said finally. People always do. But the foreclosure proceedings you mentioned were a possibility, not a certainty, Vanessa interrupted. We may have presented the worst-case scenario more dramatically than necessary. Detective Chen's voice in my ear was sharp. She's admitting to misrepresentation. So you exaggerated the danger I was in. We were trying to motivate you to take action, David admitted. Sometimes people need a clear picture of potential consequences before they'll make difficult decisions. Even if that picture isn't entirely accurate, Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Mother, what is this? Why are you questioning everything we've told you? We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're criminals. The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow, but I maintained my confused expression. I'm not questioning your motives, sweetheart. I'm just trying to understand the facts so I can make an informed decision. The facts are simple, David said firmly. This house is too expensive for you to maintain long term. We can buy it for fair value and help you transition to something more manageable. Everyone benefits, especially you since you get a $5 million house for $3.2 million. I said quietly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Vanessa and David stared at me with expressions I'd never seen before, not anger, but something colder, something calculating. "Where did you get that number?" David asked carefully. "From a real estate agent. I called yesterday to get an independent assessment." "Mother real estate agents inflate values to get listings," Vanessa said quickly. "That's not the same as actual market value." This agent wasn't trying to get a listing. I told her I was just curious about what my house might be worth. David moved away from the window, his body language shifting into something more aggressive. "Margaret, I think you're getting confused about the difference between asking prices and selling prices. Houses in your neighborhood might be listed for 4 or 5 million, but that doesn't mean they actually sell for those amounts." "Don't they?" "No, they don't." His voice was getting harder, more authoritative. "We've researched this extensively. 3.2 is not only fair, it's probably optimistic." I looked at my daughter, this stranger who had Robert's eyes but none of his warmth. "Vanessa, do you agree with that assessment?" "Of course I do. Mother David works with property values all the time through his job. He knows what he's talking about. His job in pharmaceuticals, his job involves asset evaluation and financial planning." David snapped. "I'm qualified to assess property values." Through my earpiece, Detective Chen whispered, "He's getting angry. Perfect." "I'm sure you are," I said soothingly. "I just want to make sure I understand everything before I make such a big decision." "What's to understand?" Vanessa's patience was clearly exhausted. "Mother, this isn't complicated. You can't afford this house long term. We can buy it at fair value. You use that money to buy something smaller and have financial security for the rest of your life. It's a win-win situation. Unless the house is actually worth 2 million more than you're offering." "It's not," David said flatly. "But if it were, hypothetically, that would change things, wouldn't it?" Vanessa stood abruptly pacing to the fireplace where our family photos still sat in their silver frames. "Mother, I don't understand what's happening here. 3 days ago you were grateful for our help. Now you're acting like we're trying to cheat you." "Are you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Vanessa's back was to me, but I could see her shoulders tense. "That's insulting, Mother." "It's a simple question, Vanessa. Are you trying to cheat me?" She turned around and for a moment her mask slipped completely. In her eyes I saw fury, frustration, and something that looked almost like hatred. "We are trying to help you," she said, her voice vibrating with suppressed emotion. "We are trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. And instead of being grateful, you're sitting here accusing us of being criminals." "I haven't accused you of anything. I've asked questions. Questions that imply we're lying to you." "Are you?" David stepped between us, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Okay, let's all take a breath here. Margaret, I understand you're feeling overwhelmed. This is a big decision, and it's natural to have second thoughts." "Second thoughts about what specifically?" "About selling the house, about trusting us to help you through this transition." "Should I trust you?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched both of their faces, seeing the moment when they realized they were trapped between admitting their deception and continuing lies that were becoming increasingly transparent. "Of course you should trust us," Vanessa said finally. "We're your family." "Family doesn't lie to each other, Vanessa." "We haven't lied to you." "Haven't you?" David's composure finally cracked. "Margaret, what exactly are you accusing us of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to be honest with me about my financial situation, about the real value of this house, and about your motivations for wanting me to sell it to you below market value." "Our motivations are to help you," Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "By pressuring me to make a quick decision based on fabricated financial documents." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Both Vanessa and David went rigid, their faces draining of color. "Fabricated documents." David's voice was carefully controlled. "What are you talking about?" Through my earpiece, Detective Chen's voice was urgent. "Don't push too hard. let them incriminate themselves. But I was past the point of careful strategy. Looking at my daughter's face, seeing the calculation and the contempt, I felt something break inside me. I'm talking about the foreclosure notices that reference non-existent companies, the creditor statements with invalid routing numbers, the bankruptcy assessment that doesn't match any of my actual financial records. Vanessa's face had gone completely white. Mother, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Because 3 days ago you had very specific information about my debts, my assets, and my legal obligations, information that turned out to be completely false. David was backing toward the door. I think we should leave. Margaret, you're clearly upset and this conversation isn't productive. Oh, but it is productive, David. It's very productive. Because for the first time since Robert died, I'm getting honest answers about what's really happening here. Nothing is happening here except a family trying to help. A family trying to steal, I interrupted, my voice rising. A daughter who waited until her father was barely in the ground before trying to con her grieving mother out of her home and her inheritance. Vanessa's composure shattered completely. Con you, mother, we were trying to save you from yourself. You're 71 years old. You're alone. You have no idea how to manage money or property or any of the practical aspects of life. We were trying to protect you by lying to me, by simplifying a complex situation so you could make rational decisions instead of emotional ones. Rational decisions like selling my home for $2 million below market value. The market value is what we offered, David shouted, then immediately looked like he regretted losing control. According to whom? According to every legitimate assessment. Show me. What? Show me the legitimate assessments. Show me the documents that support your claim that this house is worth $3.2 million instead of $5 million. They stared at me in silence, and I could see them both struggling with the realization that their carefully constructed deception was falling apart. We don't have to prove anything to you, Vanessa said finally, her voice cold. If you don't want our help, fine. Figure it out yourself. I already am figuring it out, sweetheart. That's the problem. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but I wasn't finished. Vanessa. She turned back her face, a mask of barely controlled rage. When you were planning this, and I know you were planning this, did you think about what it would do to me? Did you consider that your father had just died, that I was grieving, that I trusted you completely? Mother, Bud, did you think about the fact that if your plan had worked, I would have been homeless and broke while you lived in my house and spent my inheritance? You wouldn't have been homeless. I would have been dependent on you for everything, which is what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted me helpless, grateful, unable to question your decisions about my life. Vanessa's laugh was harsh, bitter. You want to know what I wanted, Mother? I wanted you to stop living in the past. I wanted you to accept reality instead of clinging to fantasies about Daddy coming back or about this house somehow keeping him alive. This isn't about Robert, Vanessa. This is about you trying to steal from me. Steal? We offered you fair market value. You offered me a lie based on fabricated documents designed to make me think I was desperate. David grabbed Vanessa's arm. We're leaving, now. But Vanessa shook him off, stepping closer to me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, pure, undisguised contempt. You want the truth, Mother? Here's the truth. You are 71 years old. You are alone. You have no idea how to manage your life without Daddy holding your hand. And sooner or later, you're going to need help, real help. And when that day comes, don't expect it to come from us. Why? Because I figured out you were lying to me. Because you chose money over family. Because you chose suspicion over trust. Because you chose to believe strangers over your own daughter. I looked at this woman who shared my DNA, but apparently none of my values, and felt something final click into place. No, Vanessa, I chose truth over lies. I chose self-respect over victimization. And I chose to remember what your father taught me about protecting myself from people who would take advantage of my grief. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing the implications of my words. What do you mean? I mean, your father knew exactly who you were, and he made sure I'd be protected from you. The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. The will, the conditional inheritance clause, $10 million, Vanessa. That's what you were supposed to inherit if you treated me with dignity during my time of mourning. I smiled, feeling ice cold and completely calm. How do you think you're doing so far? David was pulling frantically at Vanessa's arm, but she seemed frozen in place. You can't be serious. Your father was very serious. He knew that grief might make me vulnerable, and he knew that some people might try to take advantage of that vulnerability. He just didn't want to believe his own daughter would be one of them. Mother, we can work this out. We can start over, forget everything that's been said. Can we forget the fabricated documents? Can we forget you telling me to find somewhere else to die? Can we forget you planning to steal my house while I was caring for your dying father? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The answer is no, Vanessa. We can't forget any of it, because it shows me who you really are when you think I'm too weak to fight back. David finally managed to drag her toward the door. This isn't over, Margaret. Yes, it is, David. It's completely over. After they left, I sat in the sudden silence of my living room and waited for the police cars that I knew were coming. Through my earpiece, Detective Chen's voice was steady and reassuring. Perfect, Mrs. Hayes. We got everything we needed. The units are moving in now. Through my front window, I could see unmarked cars pulling up to the curb. In the distance, I heard car doors slamming and voices calling out official warnings. My daughter was about to be arrested for trying to defraud me, and I felt nothing but relief. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed across my driveway like the final note of a symphony I never wanted to hear. Through my living room window, I watched Detective Chen approach Vanessa and David's car with two uniformed officers, their movements precise and professional. The same daughter who had kissed my cheek and called me mother 20 minutes ago was now screaming obscenities as they pulled her from the passenger seat. You don't understand. Vanessa's voice carried across the evening air, shrill and desperate. She's confused. She's grieving. This is all a misunderstanding. But Detective Chen had heard the entire conversation. Through my wire had listened to Vanessa admit to simplifying my financial situation, and David acknowledged they'd presented worst-case scenarios more dramatically than necessary. There would be no explaining away what they'd said in my living room. I removed the wire from my chest with trembling fingers, my skin raw where the tape had been. The technical equipment felt foreign against my palms, a reminder that I'd just lived through something that belonged in crime novels, not in the life of a 71-year-old widow from the suburbs. David was cooperating more quietly than Vanessa, his businessman's instinct apparently telling him that causing a scene would only make things worse. But as they guided him toward the police car, he looked directly at my window, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. Not anger, not fear calculation. Even now, even with handcuffs on his wrists, he was planning his next move. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen. Stay inside until we've cleared the scene. I'll be in to debrief in about 20 minutes. I sank into Robert's chair and tried to process what had just happened. 3 hours ago, I'd been a woman gathering evidence against her daughter. Now I was a witness in a federal fraud case that would likely destroy what was left of my family forever. The house felt different, not just quiet, but hollow like a theater after the final curtain call. Every familiar object seemed to be asking the same question. Was it worth it? The grandfather clock ticked away seconds that led toward a future I couldn't begin to imagine, one where my only child would be in prison and I would be truly alone. But then I remembered Vanessa's face when she'd finally dropped her mask completely, the contempt in her voice, when she'd called me useless, and I knew the answer. It had been worth it, not because I wanted revenge, but because some truths are too important to ignore no matter how much they hurt. When Detective Chen knocked on my door, I was still sitting among the scattered family photographs, holding the picture of 8-year-old Vanessa with chocolate cake on her face. How are you feeling, Mrs. Hayes? Like I just watched my daughter die, I said honestly. Even though she's very much alive, Detective Chen settled into the chair across from me, her expression compassionate but professional. What you did today took incredible courage. Most people in your situation would have chosen to ignore the evidence rather than face it. Most people don't have husbands who plan for every contingency from beyond the grave. About that, we need to discuss what happens next. The evidence we gathered today is substantial, but building a case will take time. There will be additional interviews, document analysis, probably testimony from other potential victims. Other victims. We've identified at least 3 elderly individuals who had suspicious financial interactions with David Morrison in the past 2 years. Your case gave us the leverage we needed to start investigating those situations more aggressively. I thought about David's cold calculation as they'd handcuffed him, the way he'd looked at me like I was just another problem to be solved. How many people have they done this to? We don't know yet, but financial predators who target the elderly rarely stop with one victim. They perfect their techniques, build their confidence, and escalate. Detective Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, what you did today may have saved other families from going through what you've experienced. What about my family? What's left of it, I mean. That's partly why I'm here. We need to discuss the charges and what you can expect going forward. Detective Chen opened her folder and spread several documents across my coffee table. Your daughter is facing charges of elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. David faces those same charges plus additional counts related to his other alleged victims. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time. How significant? Vanessa could face 8 to 12 years. David, given his apparent leadership role and the multiple victims, could be looking at 15 to 20. The numbers hit me like physical blows. 15 to 20 years. My daughter might be 50 years old before she was free again. Any chance of grandchildren, of reconciliation, of rebuilding our relationship, all of it would be gone. Detective Chen, is there any possibility this could be resolved without prison time? Some kind of plea agreement, restitution, community service? Mrs. Hayes, I understand this is your daughter, but what she attempted was a serious crime. She targeted you specifically because she believed your grief made you vulnerable. She created sophisticated, fraudulent documents. She attempted to steal your home and your financial security. Detective Chen's voice was gentle but firm. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a calculated criminal enterprise. I know what it was, I said quietly. I just keep thinking about the little girl in these pictures, wondering where she went. Sometimes people change, Mrs. Hayes. Sometimes they become capable of things we never imagined they could do. I picked up the photo of Vanessa's 8th birthday party, studying her gap-toothed smile and remembering how she'd insisted on wearing her princess dress for a week afterward. Will I have to testify against her? Yes. Your testimony will be crucial to the prosecution's case. And if I refuse, Detective Chen's expression didn't change, but her voice became more formal. Mrs. Hayes, you're a victim of a crime, but you're also a witness. If necessary, you could be compelled to testify through a subpoena. The reality of what lay ahead began to settle over me like a heavy blanket. Court appearances, lawyers' media attention, the intimate details of my family's dysfunction exposed for public consumption, and at the end of it all, my daughter in prison and me alone with the consequences of our mutual betrayal. How long before the trial? Probably 6 to 9 months, assuming they don't accept plea deals. But Mrs. Hayes, there's something else we need to discuss. What now? Detective Chen pulled out another document. During our investigation of David's employment, we discovered some irregularities in his company's financial records. Morrison Pharmaceuticals has been under federal surveillance for over a year. Vanessa mentioned that the company was in trouble. It's worse than trouble. The FBI believes Morrison Pharmaceuticals has been engaged in a sophisticated money laundering operation using legitimate business transactions to clean proceeds from various illegal activities. My stomach dropped. And David was involved. We believe David was more than involved. We believe he may have been one of the key architects of the scheme. Oh God. What does that mean? It means this case is much bigger than a simple elder fraud. If our suspicions are correct, David has been laundering millions of dollars through pharmaceutical transactions, real estate deals, and investment schemes. Your case may have uncovered a criminal enterprise that spans multiple states and involves dozens of co-conspirators. I felt like I was drowning. So Vanessa wasn't just trying to steal my house. She was trying to steal it for money laundering. Possibly, we're still investigating, but high-value real estate is a common method for cleaning illegal money. Buy a house with dirty money, sell it at a profit, and suddenly you have legitimate income. The room was spinning. I gripped the arms of Robert's chair and tried to anchor myself to something solid. Detective Chen, are you telling me my daughter was part of a money laundering conspiracy? We don't know how much Vanessa knew about David's other activities. It's possible she was just a willing participant in the fraud against you without understanding the larger criminal enterprise. But it's also possible she knew everything. Yes. I closed my eyes and tried to process this new information. Bad enough that my daughter had tried to steal from me, but if she'd been knowingly involved in money laundering, if she'd been part of a criminal organization that had victimized other families. Mrs. Hayes, there's one more thing. I opened my eyes, not sure I could handle another revelation. We need to discuss your safety. My safety? If David Morrison is as deeply involved in criminal activities as we suspect, and if he believes you're responsible for exposing him, you could be at risk. At risk, how? Detective Chen's expression was grave. People who launder money for criminal organizations don't usually go to prison quietly. They have resources, connections, and strong motivations to eliminate threats to their operations. You think David might try to hurt me? I think David might try to do whatever he thinks is necessary to protect himself and his associates. The fear hit me like ice water. I'd been so focused on the emotional betrayal on the family dynamics and the fraud charges that I hadn't considered I might actually be in physical danger. What should I do? For now, we're going to have patrol cars drive by your house several times a day. We've also arranged for monitoring of your phone and email in case anyone tries to threaten or intimidate you. And if that's not enough, then we'll discuss more protective measures. But Mrs. Hayes, I want you to understand something important. What you did today, exposing this fraud, cooperating with our investigation, it was the right thing to do, not just for you, but potentially for dozens of other victims. I looked around my living room at the family photos scattered across the coffee table at Robert's chair, where I'd spent so many peaceful evenings at the grandfather clock that had marked the hours of our 47-year marriage. Detective Chen, do you think I'm going to be able to stay in this house to continue living my normal life? That depends on several factors: how the prosecution proceeds, how David's associates react, what other criminal activities we uncover. She paused. Mrs. Hayes, I'm not going to lie to you. The next few months are going to be difficult, but you have resources, you have legal protection, and you have the truth on your side. After Detective Chen left, I walked through my house like a stranger, seeing everything through new eyes. The kitchen where Robert had made me coffee every morning for 4 decades, would I ever feel safe there again? The bedroom where we'd shared our dreams and fears, would I be able to sleep peacefully, knowing that dangerous people might consider me a threat? I found myself in Robert's study, surrounded by the books and papers that had been his refuge during the last years of his life. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, pens in their leather holder, reading glasses folded beside his favorite novel, a half-finished crossword puzzle from the newspaper dated 2 weeks before his death. But now I noticed things I'd missed before: a small safe I'd never seen him open, file cabinets with locks that seemed more sophisticated than necessary for ordinary financial records, a computer system that appeared far more complex than what a retired man would need for managing household expenses. Had Robert suspected something about David? Had he known about the money laundering, the criminal connections, the danger that his son-in-law might pose to his family? I tried to remember conversations from the months before Robert's death looking for clues I might have missed. He'd been asking more questions about Vanessa and David's lifestyle, their frequent expensive vacations, David's rapid advancement at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. At the time, I thought he was just being a concerned father. Now I wondered if he'd been conducting his own investigation. The safe was small, designed to be hidden behind the row of law books on the bottom shelf. I'd never noticed it before, but once I moved the books, it was obvious. The lock was electronic, requiring a 6-digit code that I had no hope of guessing. But as I stared at the keypad, I remembered something Robert used to say when he was frustrated with technology. Why do people make passwords so complicated when the important dates are already in your head? I tried our wedding anniversary 051576, nothing. Vanessa's birthday 040892, nothing. Then I tried the date we'd bought this house 032078. The safe clicked open. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, copies of financial records, photographs of David meeting with people I didn't recognize, what appeared to be surveillance reports with dates and locations, and a thick folder labeled Insurance Policy, Margaret's Eyes Only. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. The first page was a letter in Robert's familiar handwriting. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then my worst fears about our son-in-law have been confirmed. I pray I'm wrong, but if David Morrison has attempted to defraud you or put you in danger, everything in this folder will help you understand what you're really dealing with. I sank into Robert's desk chair and continued reading. 6 months ago, I began noticing irregularities in David's lifestyle that didn't match his legitimate income from Morrison Pharmaceuticals, expensive cars, luxury vacations, designer clothing purchases that suggested access to money far beyond his salary. When I discreetly investigated, I discovered connections to individuals with known ties to organized crime. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the pages. Margaret, I believe our son-in-law is involved in money laundering for criminal organizations. I believe he has been using his position at Morrison Pharmaceuticals to facilitate these activities, and I believe that if he ever faces exposure or prosecution, he will do whatever is necessary to protect himself, including harming anyone he perceives as a threat. The next page contained photographs David in restaurants with men whose faces had been circled in red ink, David leaving buildings that Robert had labeled as known money laundering fronts, David making what appeared to be large cash deposits at banks. I have been working with a private investigator to document David's activities. These photographs and the accompanying financial records should provide law enforcement with enough evidence to begin a formal investigation. But Margaret, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me before I could take action myself. I turned to the final page of the letter. I've tried to protect you through my will through the conditional inheritance clause that will prevent Vanessa from accessing her inheritance if she betrays you. But legal protections may not be enough if David decides you're a threat to his criminal operation. Trust no one except James Morrison, our attorney, and Detective Sarah Chen of the Financial Crimes Unit. I've already briefed her on my suspicions, and she'll be expecting you to contact her if you need help. At the bottom of the page, in Robert's careful handwriting, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this myself. I love you more than life, and I pray you find the strength to do what I could not. I sat in stunned silence, holding my husband's final gift, not just financial security, but the tools to understand and fight the danger he'd seen coming. Robert hadn't just suspected David was a criminal. He'd been building a case against him. The private investigator's reports filled in details that made my blood run cold. David hadn't just been laundering money, he'd been stealing it. Morrison Pharmaceuticals had been systematically overcharging insurance companies, then using the excess payments to clean money for drug dealers, arms dealers, and human traffickers. And Vanessa had known. The reports included photographs of her at meetings with David's criminal associates, documents showing her signature on suspicious financial transactions, evidence that she'd been actively involved in the money laundering scheme for at least 2 years. My daughter wasn't just guilty of trying to defraud me. She was a member of a criminal organization that had destroyed countless lives through their drug trafficking and human trafficking operations. I thought about the little girl in the birthday party photograph and realized that child had been dead for longer than I'd known. The woman who'd looked me in the eye and told me to find somewhere else to die wasn't just cruel, she was a criminal who'd been willing to sacrifice her own mother to protect her illegal activities. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Detective Chen's number. "Mrs. Hayes, we need you to come to the station immediately. There's been a development in your case." "What kind of development?" "David Morrison has been trying to make a deal with the prosecutor. He's claiming he has information about a larger criminal conspiracy, and he's offering to testify against his co-conspirators in exchange for reduced charges, including Vanessa, especially Vanessa. Mrs. Hayes David is claiming that your daughter was the mastermind behind the fraud against you and that she was also the leader of the money laundering operation at Morrison Pharmaceuticals." I looked at the photographs spread across Robert's desk, images of David clearly in charge of meetings, clearly directing financial transactions, clearly the dominant figure in every criminal activity they documented. "Detective Chen, I think David is lying, and I think I can prove it." 2 hours later, I sat in the police station conference room watching Detective Chen and federal prosecutor Amanda Richards examine Robert's evidence files. The photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports painted a clear picture of David as the leader of the criminal enterprise, not a reluctant participant or a victim of Vanessa's manipulation. "Mrs. Hayes, this is extraordinary," Prosecutor Richards said, studying a photograph of David meeting with known money launderers. "Your husband essentially conducted his own federal investigation. These documents are going to be crucial to our case. So David can't blame everything on Vanessa. Not with this evidence. These photographs show David clearly in leadership positions, making key decisions directing other participants." Detective Chen pointed to a financial record. "And these bank records show that David had sole access to the primary accounts used for laundering money." "What does this mean for Vanessa's case?" Prosecutor Richards closed the file folder. "It means your daughter is still facing serious charges, but she's not going to be scapegoated for her husband's crimes. The evidence suggests she was a willing participant, but not the mastermind David is trying to paint her as." "And what about David's plea bargain?" "It's off the table. With this evidence, we don't need his testimony. We can prosecute the entire conspiracy based on your husband's investigation and the evidence we've gathered through our own surveillance." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth about David's leadership role would prevent him from escaping justice by blaming Vanessa. Sadness that the evidence would likely ensure both of them faced maximum sentences. "Mrs. Hayes, there's something else we need to discuss," Detective Chen said carefully. "The individuals David was working with, his criminal associates, they're not going to be happy about this prosecution. And they're going to know that you provided the evidence that brought down their operation." "Meaning Tom?" "Meaning your safety concerns just became much more serious." Prosecutor Richards leaned forward. "Mrs. Hayes, we're prepared to offer you witness protection if necessary, new identity relocation, complete severance from your current life." The room went silent. I thought about leaving this house, these memories, everything Robert and I had built together, starting over at 71 years old in some anonymous city, living under a false name, never again able to visit Robert's grave or walk through the garden he'd planted for our anniversary. Is that really necessary? We don't know yet. But Mrs. Hayes, the people David was working with, have been operating a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. They've killed people for much smaller threats than what you represent. How long would I have to decide? We'll know more after we arrest the other co-conspirators. But I need you to understand, if we determine you're in imminent danger, we won't be asking for your permission to move you." That night, I sat in Robert's chair, surrounded by the evidence of crimes. I'd never imagined trying to decide if holding my daughter accountable was worth losing everything else I'd ever loved. But then I remembered David's cold calculation as they'd handcuffed him, the way he'd looked at me like I was just another obstacle to be removed. I thought about the other victims, the elderly people who'd trusted him and been betrayed. I thought about the drug dealers and human traffickers whose money he'd helped launder and the lives that had been destroyed to generate the profits he'd cleaned. And I knew that some truths are too important to hide no matter what they cost. My phone buzzed with the text from an unknown number. Mrs. Hayes, you've made some powerful people very unhappy. It would be wise to reconsider your cooperation with law enforcement. I stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Detective Chen. Her response came immediately. Pack a bag, we're moving you tonight. As I walked through my house one last time, gathering the few possessions I could take with me, I stopped in front of the grandfather clock that had marked the hours of my marriage to Robert. Soon, strangers would live in this house, sleep in our bedroom, sit in our living room, never knowing about the love and laughter and 47 years of memories these walls had witnessed. But they would also never know about the betrayal, the lies, the criminal conspiracy that had shattered the family Robert and I had tried so hard to build. I touched the clock's face, gently listening to its steady tick for the last time. I kept my promise, Robert, I whispered. I found the strength to do what you couldn't. Outside, an unmarked car waited to take me to a safe house where I would spend the next several months preparing to testify against my own daughter. As we drove away, I watched my house disappear in the rearview mirror and wondered if I would ever see it again. But for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt like myself again. Not a victim, not a confused old woman, not someone to be protected or manipulated or lied to. I was Margaret Hayes. I was a woman who had uncovered a criminal conspiracy, who had chosen truth over comfort, who had decided that some principles were more important than peace, and I was just getting started. The safe house was a modest two-bedroom ranch in a subdivision 40 miles from everything I'd ever called home. Generic beige walls, furniture that looked like it came from a hotel liquidation sale, and windows covered with blinds that the federal marshals warned me never to open. It felt like living inside a cardboard box, but it was supposed to keep me alive long enough to testify against the people who had been my family. Marshal Jennifer Walsh was a compact woman in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of alert eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. She'd been assigned as my primary protection detail, which meant she knew where I was every minute of every day, monitored my phone calls, screened my mail, and slept in the room next to mine with a loaded gun on her nightstand. Mrs. Hayes, I know this is difficult, she said on my third morning in captivity, because that's what it felt like, despite the fact that I was supposedly being protected rather than imprisoned. But you need to understand that the people we're dealing with have unlimited resources and no moral constraints. They've killed federal witnesses before. I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through sawdust, trying to process the fact that my life had been reduced to this sterile box where nothing belonged to me and every moment was supervised by strangers. How long will this last? That depends on several factors: how quickly we can arrest the remaining co-conspirators, how cooperative they are once we catch them, whether any of them decide to target you specifically. Marshal Walsh sat across from me, her expression professionally sympathetic. Mrs. Hayes, I've been doing this for 15 years. I protected witnesses in cases involving drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers. Your case is unusual because it's so personal. Most of our witnesses aren't testifying against their own children. Most of their children aren't money laundering criminals. True, but family dynamics complicate everything. Your daughter knows your habits, your vulnerabilities, your emotional triggers. If she decides to cooperate with people who want to silence you, she could provide them with information that makes you extremely difficult to protect. The thought hit me like a physical blow. You think Vanessa would help people hurt me. Mrs. Hayes, Your daughter tried to steal your house and your inheritance 3 days after your husband's funeral. She fabricated legal documents, lied to your face repeatedly, and showed no remorse when confronted with evidence of her crimes. Marshall Walsh's voice was gentle but firm. I think your daughter is capable of anything. And I stared out the small kitchen window at a view of someone else's backyard, someone else's life, continuing normally while mine had been dismantled piece by piece. In the distance, I could see children playing on a swing set, their laughter carrying through the glass like an echo from a world I used to inhabit. Have you heard anything about the arrests? Some. David's associates are proving harder to locate than we anticipated. 2 of them fled the country before we could move. The others have gone underground. Marshall Walsh checked her phone, a gesture I'd learned meant she was receiving updates on the case. But we did get some good news yesterday. What kind of good news? Vanessa wants to make a deal. I felt my heart stop. What kind of deal? She's offering to testify against David and his associates in exchange for reduced charges. Apparently, she has information about the money laundering operation that could help us locate the missing co-conspirators. And what would that mean for her sentence? If she cooperates fully and her information leads to successful prosecutions, she might face 5 to 8 years instead of 15 to 20. 5 to 8 years. My daughter might be free by the time she was 40, young enough to rebuild her life, start over, maybe even have the children she'd always talked about wanting. But it would also mean she was betraying the criminal organization that had threatened to kill me, which might make both of us targets for retaliation. Marshall Walsh, if Vanessa testifies against these people, won't that put her in danger too? Yes, which is why she's also requesting witness protection. The irony was breathtaking. My daughter, who had tried to steal my home and leave me homeless, now wanted the federal government to give her a new identity and a fresh start in exchange for information that might get us both killed. What did the prosecutors tell her? That they're interested, but they want to verify her information before they make any commitments. And Mrs. Hayes, Marshall Walsh paused, choosing her words carefully, they want you to be part of the verification process. Meaning they want you to meet with Vanessa, to listen to what she claims to know, help them determine if she's telling the truth, and decide whether her cooperation is worth the risk of reducing her sentence. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. They want me to sit across from my daughter and decide whether she deserves mercy after she tried to destroy my life. Essentially, yes. And if I refuse, then they'll make the decision without your input. But Mrs. Hayes, your insights about Vanessa's character, her motivations, her reliability, those could be crucial to determining whether her offer's genuine or just another manipulation. I thought about the little girl with chocolate cake on her face, about the teenager who'd cried in my arms after her first heartbreak, about the woman who'd looked me in the eye and told me to find somewhere else to die. Which version of my daughter would show up for this meeting? And more importantly, which version of myself was I willing to become when told, tomorrow afternoon, if you're willing. The meeting would be at the federal courthouse with prosecutors and attorneys present, completely secure environment. And afterward, you help them decide whether trusting your daughter is worth the risk. That evening I sat in the generic living room of my safe house prison, staring at the phone number Marshall Walsh had given me for the prison where Vanessa was being held. One call would connect me to my daughter for the first time since she'd been arrested in my driveway. One conversation might help me understand whether the woman who'd betrayed me so completely was capable of genuine remorse and cooperation, or if this was just the next phase of her manipulation. I dialed the number. This is a collect call from the Federal Detention Center. Will you accept charges from Vanessa Morrison? My throat was so tight I could barely speak. Yes. The line crackled, and then I heard her voice, smaller than I remembered, vulnerable in a way that reminded me of the child she'd been before ambition and greed had transformed her into someone I didn't recognize. Mother. Hello, Vanessa. Silence stretched between us across the phone line, filled with everything we'd said and everything we'd never be able to take back. Mother, I don't know how to start. Neither do I. I've been thinking about what happened, about the things I said to you, and her voice broke. I'm so sorry, Mother. I'm so ashamed of what I did, what I became. I closed my eyes, trying to determine if what I was hearing was genuine emotion or calculated performance. Are you Vanessa, or are you sorry you got caught? I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry I tried to take advantage of your grief. The words came in a rush, as if she'd been rehearsing them. Mother, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to know that every single day, since they arrested me, I've been thinking about that little girl in the photographs, the one you raised, and wondering how I became someone she would hate. How did you become someone she would hate, Vanessa? Another long pause. I got lost. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring my worth by what I had instead of who I was. David's lifestyle, the money, the status, it all seemed so important. And when his company started having problems, when we realized we might lose everything, I was willing to do anything to protect what I thought was mine, including stealing from your grieving mother. Yes, the admission was barely a whisper. Including that. Mother, I convinced myself I was helping you, that you'd be better off in a smaller place, that the money would give you security. But the truth is, I was thinking about myself, about David, about preserving the life we'd built on money that wasn't really ours. I thought about Robert's evidence files, about the photographs showing David's leadership role in the criminal organization. Vanessa, how much did you know about David's other activities? More than I should have, less than the prosecutors think. Her voice was getting stronger, more focused. Mother, David wasn't the man I thought I married. The criminal stuff, the money laundering, the connections to drug dealers, I didn't know about most of it until recently. But you knew about some of it. I knew he was making money in ways that didn't seem legitimate. I knew some of his business associates were questionable, but I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers. That's not the same as being innocent, Vanessa. No, it's not. I was willfully ignorant because ignorance was comfortable. I let David make decisions about our finances, our lifestyle, our future, because as long as I could maintain plausible deniability, I could enjoy the benefits without accepting responsibility for how we got them. I was surprised by her honesty, by the self-awareness that seemed genuine rather than rehearsed. But I'd been surprised by Vanessa before, and not in good ways. The prosecutors think you might have information that could help them arrest David's associates. I do. Names, meeting locations, financial account numbers, safe deposit box keys. I know where David kept records of everything. Her voice took on an urgent quality. Mother, these people are dangerous. They've killed witnesses before, and they're not going to hesitate to kill you if they think you're a threat to their operation. So why are you offering to help? If these people are as dangerous as you say, cooperating with the prosecutors puts you at risk too. Because it's the right thing to do. Because I owe it to the people they've hurt. And because she paused, and I could hear her crying. Because I owe it to you, Mother. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can help keep you safe. Or maybe you're just trying to reduce your sentence. Maybe both things can be true, she said quietly. Maybe I can do the right thing for selfish reasons, and it's still the right thing. I sat in the silence of my safe house prison, listening to my daughter cry through a phone line that was probably being recorded by federal agents, and tried to decide whether I was hearing genuine remorse or just another layer of manipulation. Vanessa, if you cooperate with the prosecutors, if you testify against David and his associates, what happens to us? To our relationship, I mean. I don't know, Mother. I hope someday you might be able to forgive me. I hope someday we might be able to rebuild something between us. but I understand if that's impossible. It might be impossible. I know. Her voice was small again, like a child accepting punishment. But even if it is, even if you never want to see me again, I still need to try to do the right thing now. I need to help stop the people who want to hurt you. Even though helping them might mean you spend more time in prison, even though it might mean I never get out of prison alive. The finality in her voice caught me off guard. What do you mean? Mother, these people don't just kill witnesses. They kill anyone who betrays them, anyone who threatens their operation, anyone who might cause problems for them down the line. If I testify against them, they'll come after me eventually. Prison won't protect me forever. The phone line crackled with static, but the silence between us was complete. My daughter was telling me she was willing to risk her life to protect mine, to undo some small part of the damage she'd caused, to choose justice over self-preservation for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Vanessa, the prosecutors want me to meet with you tomorrow, to listen to what you have to tell them and help them decide whether your information is reliable. Will you come? I don't know. Part of me never wants to see you again. Part of me thinks this is just another con, another way for you to manipulate people into giving you what you want. And what does the other part think? I closed my eyes and tried to find the mother I'd been before grief and betrayal had hardened my heart. The other part thinks maybe people can change. Maybe someone can do terrible things and still find their way back to being human. I want to find my way back, Mother. I want to be someone you could be proud of again. It's going to take more than wanting Vanessa. I know, but it's a start, isn't it? After I hung up, I sat in the artificial quiet of my temporary home and tried to decide what I believed. Was my daughter genuinely remorseful, or was she just a better actress than I'd given her credit for? Was she really willing to risk her life to protect mine, or was this just another elaborate scheme to reduce her sentence and manipulate my emotions? Marshall Walsh found me there an hour later, staring out the kitchen window at the backyard that belonged to someone else. How did it go? I don't know. She sounds different. Smaller. More like the daughter I remember from before she became whoever she became. But you're not sure if it's genuine. I'm not sure of anything anymore. I turned to face her. Marshall Walsh, in your experience, do criminals like Vanessa ever really change? Do they ever become capable of genuine remorse and selfless behavior? Sometimes, not often, but sometimes. She sat down across from me. Mrs. Hayes, I've seen people do terrible things to their own families, steal from them, lie to them, put them in physical danger. Most of the time, those people are just fundamentally selfish, and they don't change no matter what consequences they face. But sometimes they do. Sometimes facing real consequences, prison, losing everything they care about, realizing they've become someone they hate. Sometimes that's enough to shock people back into being human. Marshall Walsh studied my face. What's your gut telling you about your daughter? I thought about Vanessa's voice on the phone, about the way she'd sounded when she'd admitted her willful ignorance, about her acknowledgement that helping the prosecution might get her killed. My gut is telling me that she's scared. Genuinely scared, not just of prison, but of the people she got involved with, and maybe that fear is enough to make her honest for the first time in years. Fear can be a powerful motivator for both good and evil. Which do you think it is in this case? Marshall Walsh was quiet for a long moment. I think your daughter realized she was in over her head, and now she's looking for a way to survive that doesn't require her to be a monster. Whether that makes her trustworthy is something only you can decide. The next afternoon, I sat in a sterile conference room at the federal courthouse, waiting to face my daughter across a table full of lawyers and prosecutors. The room smelled like industrial carpet and anxiety filled with the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were dying of some wasting disease. Prosecutor Amanda Richards had arranged the participants like pieces on a chessboard herself, and Detective Chen on one side, Vanessa's public defender on another, Marshall Walsh positioned where she could watch all the exits, and me at the head of the table where I could observe everything and everyone. Mrs. Hayes, before we bring in your daughter, I want to make sure you understand what we're looking for today, Prosecutor Richards said, shuffling through a stack of documents. We need to determine whether Vanessa's information is reliable, whether she's genuinely willing to cooperate, and whether the intelligence she's offering is worth the reduction in charges we'd have to give her. And my role is to help you figure out if she's lying. Your role is to help us understand whether the person we're dealing with is capable of telling the truth when it matters. The door opened, and two federal marshals escorted Vanessa into the room. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the shackles around her ankles. Her hair, always perfectly styled, hung limp around a face that showed the kind of exhaustion that comes from weeks of sleepless nights and constant fear. But when she looked at me, her eyes were clear and focused in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. "Hello, Mother." "Hello, Vanessa." Prosecutor Richards gestured toward the chair across from me. "Ms. Morrison, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. As we've discussed, your cooperation with this investigation could significantly impact your sentence, but we need to verify the accuracy and completeness of the information you're providing." Vanessa nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. "I understand. Let's start with the financial records. You claim to know the location of documents that detail the money laundering operation David was running through Morrison Pharmaceuticals. David kept everything in 3 locations: a safe deposit box at First National Bank under the name Michael Davidson, a storage unit in Riverside, and a concealed safe in our home office. Vanessa's voice was steady, professional. The safe deposit box contains account numbers for offshore banks' transaction records, showing how drug money was processed through pharmaceutical purchases, and contact information for his associates. Detective Chen was taking notes, occasionally looking up to study Vanessa's face. "How do you know this information is accurate?" "Because I helped David organize it. Not the criminal part. I didn't know what the documents represented at first, but the filing system, the security protocols, the backup procedures." Vanessa's composure slipped slightly. "I thought I was helping him manage legitimate business records." "When did you realize the records weren't legitimate?" "About 6 months ago. I found communications between David and men I recognized from news reports about drug trafficking arrests. When I confronted him, he told me I was safer not knowing the details." I leaned forward. "But you didn't leave him. You didn't report him to the authorities." Vanessa met my eyes directly. "No, Mother, I didn't. Because I was a coward who valued comfort over conscience." The honesty in her voice was startling. In all the years I'd known adult Vanessa, I'd never heard her admit to moral failure so directly. Prosecutor Richards consulted her notes. "Ms. Morrison, you've indicated that you have information about David's associates that could help us locate the individuals who are still at large." David kept detailed records of everyone he worked with: names, addresses, phone numbers, meeting schedules, even personal information about their families and vulnerabilities. Vanessa's hands were clenched in her lap. "He was paranoid about betrayal, so he maintained what he called insurance files on everyone in the organization." "Where are these files?" "In the storage unit, along with copies of everything from the safe deposit box." David believed in redundancy. Detective Chen looked up from her notes. "Ms. Morrison, why should we trust this information? How do we know you're not sending us on wild goose chases while your husband's associates disappear permanently?" "Because they want to kill my mother," Vanessa said simply, "and they want to kill me too now that I'm cooperating with you. I have no reason to protect people who are planning my murder." The room fell silent. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was fear and exhaustion and something that looked like genuine resolve. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "if you give the prosecutors this information, if you testify against these people, you're essentially signing your own death warrant." "Maybe. Or maybe helping them catch David's associates is the only way either of us survives this." She leaned forward, and for a moment she looked exactly like the child who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared her. Mother, these people have killed federal witnesses before. They've killed prosecutors, judges, FBI agents. They have unlimited resources and no moral constraints. So why risk making them angrier by cooperating? Because they're already angry, because they already want us dead, because running and hiding isn't going to change that. Vanessa's voice got stronger, more determined. But if we help the FBI arrest them, if we help put them in prison, then maybe we actually have a chance. Prosecutor Richards was studying both of us carefully. Ms. Morrison, let's talk about your mother's safety specifically. Do you have information about active threats against her? David's associates believe Mother is the key witness who can destroy their operation. They think if they eliminate her, the case against them falls apart. Vanessa looked directly at me. They're wrong. The evidence is bigger than just your testimony, but they don't know that. What kind of threats are we talking about? David's cellmate is reporting their conversations to his associates on the outside. According to what I've heard, they're planning to make Mother's death look like a home invasion gone wrong. Vanessa's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. They want it to appear random so it doesn't look like witness intimidation. My blood went cold. How do you know this? Because some of David's associates are also in federal detention, and prison communications aren't as secure as people think. Vanessa turned to Prosecutor Richards. If you want to save my mother's life, you need to arrest Marcus Volkov, Tony Castellanos, and Jennifer Park within the next 72 hours. Detective Chen was writing frantically. You have current locations for these individuals. I have the locations David's people are using to communicate with them. Whether they're still there is another question. Ms. Morrison, Prosecutor Richards said carefully, the level of detail you're providing suggests much deeper involvement in this criminal organization than you initially claimed. For the first time since entering the room, Vanessa looked genuinely ashamed. I told you I knew more than I should have. The truth is, I was David's accomplice in more ways than just the fraud against my mother. I helped him organize the money laundering operation. I participated in meetings with his criminal associates, and I signed documents that I knew were part of illegal transactions. Why are you admitting to additional crimes that's only going to increase your sentence? Because my mother deserves the truth, because the other victims deserve justice, and because I'm tired of being the kind of person who chooses comfort over conscience. I stared at my daughter, this woman who had betrayed me so completely, who had chosen crime over family, who had been willing to leave me homeless and broke, and tried to reconcile that person with the one sitting across from me, now confessing to additional felonies because it was the right thing to do. Vanessa, I said quietly, if you do this, if you provide all this information and testify against these people, you're looking at a much longer prison sentence. I know. You might never get out. You might never have the life you wanted, the children you talked about, the fresh start you were hoping for. I know that too. Then why? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her shackled hands. When she looked up, her eyes were wet but clear. Because I want to be someone you could be proud of again. Even if it's too late for us, even if you never forgive me, I want to do something that honors the way you and Daddy raised me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I want to choose my family over my comfort for once in my life. The silence in the room was complete. I looked at this woman who had caused me such pain, who had betrayed my trust so completely, who had been willing to sacrifice my welfare for her own benefit, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw my daughter, not the entitled, manipulative criminal she'd become, but the child who had once crawled into my lap during thunderstorms, who had cried in my arms after her first heartbreak, who had promised me she'd always be my little girl no matter how old she got. Prosecutor Richards, I said, my voice stronger than I'd felt in weeks, I believe my daughter is telling the truth, and I believe her information can help you catch the people who want to kill both of us. Mrs. Hayes, are you certain? Once we move forward with this, there's no going back. I looked at Vanessa at the fear and hope and desperate determination in her eyes and made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I'm certain. Let's catch these bastards. The raids happened at dawn on a Tuesday morning, coordinated across 3 states like a military operation designed to dismantle a criminal empire that had been years in the making. From my safe house, I watched the news coverage on a secure television feed, seeing federal agents in tactical gear breaking down doors in Philadelphia, Miami, and Las Vegas simultaneously. The storage unit Vanessa had identified yielded over 200 boxes of evidence. The safe deposit box contained financial records that traced money laundering activities back 5 years. And the arrests Marcus Volkov taken down in a restaurant parking lot, Tony Castellanos found hiding in his sister's basement, Jennifer Park captured at a private airfield trying to flee to Mexico. Mrs. Hayes, it worked, Detective Chen called to tell me, her voice crackling with exhaustion and triumph. Your daughter's information was completely accurate. We've arrested 12 members of David's organization, seized over $40 million in assets, and recovered enough evidence to prosecute money laundering cases in 6 different jurisdictions. I sat in my government-issued kitchen, holding the phone with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since I'd watched the news footage of armed federal agents storming through locations my daughter had memorized from her participation in criminal activities. What about the threats against me? With the leadership of the organization in custody, the immediate danger has been significantly reduced. We're still monitoring communications, but it appears the people who were planning to harm you are now more concerned with their own legal problems. So I can go home. Not yet. There's still the trial to consider, and we need to make sure all the co-conspirators have been identified and arrested. But Mrs. Hayes, for the first time since this started, I'm optimistic about your long-term safety. After Detective Chen hung up, I walked through the sterile rooms of my temporary prison and tried to imagine returning to the house Robert and I had shared, to the grandfather clock and the rose garden and the living room where scattered family photographs had first revealed the extent of my daughter's betrayal. Would it feel like home again, or would it forever be tainted by the memories of lies and manipulation and the night I'd been forced to flee for my life? Marshall Walsh found me standing at the kitchen window watching children play in the backyard that belonged to someone else's normal life. Thinking about going back, thinking about whether there's anything to go back to, I turned to face her. Marshall Walsh, in your experience, do people ever really recover from something like this? Do families ever rebuild after betrayal this complete? Some do, most don't. She sat down at the table where I'd spent weeks learning to live with fear as a constant companion. Mrs. Hayes, what your daughter did to you was unforgivable by most people's standards, but what she did today, providing information that could have gotten her killed, confessing to additional crimes that will increase her sentence, choosing to protect you over protecting herself, that's not nothing either. Is it enough? That's not for me to decide. But I will say this, in 15 years of protecting witnesses, I've never seen someone voluntarily increase their own criminal liability in order to save someone they'd previously betrayed. I thought about Vanessa's face during our meeting at the courthouse, about the way she'd looked when she'd admitted to being David's accomplice, about her willingness to accept a longer prison sentence if it meant keeping me safe. She's still going to prison for a very long time. Yes, she is. But Mrs. Hayes' prison isn't always the end of someone's story. Sometimes it's where they figure out who they want to be when they get out. 3 weeks later, I received a letter forwarded through the U.S. Marshals Service. The return address was the Federal Detention Center, and the handwriting was Vanessa's. Dear Mother, it began, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't want to read this. But there are things I need to say even if you never respond. First, I need you to know that everything I told the prosecutors was true. Every document location, every associate's name, every detail about David's criminal activities, all of it was accurate because I wanted to make sure the people who threatened you would be caught and punished. Second, I need you to understand that my cooperation wasn't motivated by a desire to reduce my sentence. In fact, my lawyer has informed me that my additional admissions of guilt will likely result in a longer prison term than if I had remained silent. I made that choice deliberately because I realized that protecting you was more important than protecting myself. Third, I want to tell you about something that happened to me in federal detention that changed everything. 3 days after my arrest, I was lying on my cell bunk staring at the ceiling and feeling sorry for myself when another inmate asked me what I was in for. When I told her fraud and money laundering, she laughed and said, "Let me guess you screwed over someone who trusted you." When I said yes, she asked, "Who?" When I said my mother, she went completely silent. Then she said, "Lady, I've done a lot of terrible things in my life. I've stolen from strangers, lied to judges, even threatened people who crossed me. But I have never, ever betrayed my own mother. That's a special kind of evil." Mother, hearing those words from a career criminal made me understand what I had become. I wasn't just someone who had made bad decisions or gotten involved with the wrong people. I was someone who had betrayed the person who loved me most in the world at the moment when she was most vulnerable. I was someone who had chosen greed over love manipulation, over honesty, self-interest, over family loyalty. But I also realized something else that night. I realized that even though I couldn't undo what I had done, I could still choose who I wanted to be going forward. I could choose to be someone who protects you instead of someone who exploits you. I could choose to tell the truth instead of constructing elaborate lies. I could choose to accept responsibility for my actions instead of blaming others or making excuses. Mother, I know that forgiveness might be impossible. I know that our relationship might be destroyed beyond repair. I know that you might never want to see me again, and I understand if that's your choice, but I need you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I will be trying to become someone worthy of the love you gave me for 32 years before I threw it all away. The prosecutors have offered me a plea agreement that would result in a 12-year sentence in exchange for my continued cooperation. I have decided to accept it, not because I think I deserve mercy, but because I want to use whatever time I have left in this world to try to make amends for the damage I've caused. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect you to visit me in prison. I don't expect you to ever forgive me. But I wanted you to know that the daughter you raised, the one who got lost somewhere along the way, she's still here, and she loves you more than life itself. Your daughter, if you'll still have me, Vanessa. I read the letter 3 times sitting in my safe house kitchen with tears streaming down my face before I realized that Marshall Walsh was standing in the doorway watching me. Good news or bad news? I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. I held up the letter. My daughter's going to prison for 12 years, and she's thanking me for the opportunity to become a better person. How do you feel about that? I thought about the question for a long time. How did I feel about my daughter accepting a 12-year prison sentence? How did I feel about her choosing to protect me at the cost of her own freedom? How did I feel about the possibility that the child I'd raised might still exist somewhere inside the criminal she'd become? Proud, I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel proud of my daughter. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom where Vanessa would be formally sentenced, watching her walk to the defendant's table in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit that made her look like a stranger. The past half year had aged her in ways that went beyond the gray streaks in her hair or the weight she'd lost in detention. She looked older, harder, but also somehow more solid, like someone who had finally stopped running from herself. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and other victims of David's criminal organization. I had been given a seat in the front row close enough to see Vanessa's face when she turned to look for me in the gallery. Our eyes met across the space that had opened between us when she'd first lied to me about being broke, and I saw something I hadn't seen since she was a child: honesty. Pure, uncomplicated honesty without calculation or manipulation or hidden agendas. Judge Patricia Martinez was a stern woman in her 60s who had built a reputation for fairness tempered with appropriate severity. She had spent the morning sentencing David to 25 years in federal prison listening to victim impact statements from elderly people whose life savings had been stolen through pharmaceutical fraud schemes. Ms. Morrison, Judge Martinez said, consulting the thick file in front of her, "You have pleaded guilty to conspiracy, money laundering, elder abuse, and fraud. The prosecution has recommended a 12-year sentence in recognition of your cooperation with their investigation. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" Vanessa stood slowly, her shackled hands folded in front of her. "Yes, Your Honor." "Proceed." "Your Honor, I want to start by acknowledging that everything I did was wrong. Not just illegal, but morally wrong. I betrayed people who trusted me. I participated in crimes that hurt innocent victims, and I exploited my own mother's grief for personal gain." Her voice was steady, clear, and completely without self-pity. "I cannot excuse my actions by claiming ignorance or coercion or diminished capacity. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I did it anyway because I valued comfort over conscience." Judge Martinez was listening intently, her expression unreadable. "Your Honor, I want to specifically address my crimes against my mother, Margaret Hayes. 3 days after my father's funeral, while she was grieving and vulnerable, I used fabricated documents to convince her that she was bankrupt and homeless. I pressured her to sell her home to me for $2 million below market value. I told her she was useless and should find somewhere else to die." Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. "These were not the actions of someone temporarily overwhelmed by financial pressure. These were the actions of someone who had lost her moral compass completely. I felt tears on my cheeks, but I didn't look away. However, Your Honor, I want the court to know that my mother's courage in exposing my crimes ultimately saved both of us. Her decision to cooperate with law enforcement despite the personal pain it caused her led to the arrest of a criminal organization that had been planning to kill us both. She chose justice over family loyalty, truth over comfort, and the safety of other potential victims over her own emotional well-being." Judge Martinez looked toward me in the gallery. "Mrs. Hayes, would you like to address the court before sentencing?" I hadn't planned to speak. The prosecutors had told me it wasn't necessary, that Vanessa's cooperation and guilty plea made victim impact statements optional. But looking at my daughter standing there in chains, accepting responsibility for crimes that would define the rest of her life, I realized I had something to say. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady after months of constant fear and stress. "Your Honor, my name is Margaret Hayes, and Vanessa Morrison is my daughter. 6 months ago, she tried to steal my home and leave me homeless. Today, she's going to prison partly because she chose to protect me from people who wanted to kill me." The courtroom was completely silent. "Your Honor, I will not pretend that what my daughter did to me was forgivable. The betrayal, the lies, the cruelty, those wounds may never heal completely. But I also cannot pretend that her cooperation with law enforcement was motivated by self-interest. She voluntarily provided information that increased her own criminal liability. She confessed to additional crimes she could have hidden. She accepted a longer prison sentence in order to help arrest people who were threatening other innocent victims." I looked directly at Vanessa, seeing the little girl who had once promised to love me forever. "Your Honor, I believe my daughter is genuinely remorseful. I believe she has accepted responsibility for her actions, and I believe that 12 years in federal prison followed by a lifetime of trying to rebuild the trust she destroyed is an appropriate consequence for her choices." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "But I also believe that people can change, that redemption is possible, and that the woman standing before you today is not the same person who committed these crimes. Mrs. Hayes, are you asking the court to show leniency toward your daughter? No, Your Honor. I'm asking the court to recognize that justice and mercy are not mutually exclusive, and that punishment can be both appropriate and hopeful. I sat down emotionally drained and watched Judge Martinez study the documents in front of her. Ms. Morrison, I have reviewed your case extensively, including your cooperation with federal prosecutors, your guilty plea, and the testimony of both victims and law enforcement personnel. Your crimes were serious, calculated, and deeply harmful to people who trusted you. However, your cooperation likely saved lives and certainly prevented additional victims from being harmed. Judge Martinez looked directly at Vanessa. I hereby sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will be eligible for parole after serving 8 years, contingent on continued good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. 12 years. My daughter would be 44 years old when she was released middle-aged and starting over with a criminal record and the knowledge that she had destroyed her family through her own choices. As the federal marshals prepared to escort Vanessa back to detention, she turned to look at me one last time. Across the space between us, she mouthed 3 words, "I love you." Without thinking, without considering the reporters or the cameras or the implications, I mouthed back, "I know." The months that followed were a strange mixture of grief and relief, loss and liberation. I returned to my house. My house, not David and Vanessa's target, not a crime scene, but the home Robert and I had built together. The rooms felt different, charged with new meanings, but also somehow lighter. The lies had been exposed, the threats had been neutralized, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I could sit in his chair and remember him without the shadow of betrayal falling across those memories. The media attention was intense but temporary. News crews camped outside my house for a week asking for interviews about the daughter who tried to steal everything. I declined them all not because I was ashamed of what had happened, but because I refused to turn my family's destruction into entertainment for strangers. The financial settlement took longer to resolve. David's assets were frozen and eventually liquidated to provide restitution to victims of the money laundering scheme. Vanessa's conviction meant that Robert's conditional inheritance clause was triggered. She lost access to the $10 million that would have been hers if she had treated me with dignity during my grief. That money, combined with the rest of Robert's estate, left me with more wealth than I had ever imagined possible. But money, I learned, doesn't heal betrayal. It doesn't replace trust or rebuild relationships or undo the fundamental changes that occur when someone you love reveals themselves to be someone you never knew. 9 months after Vanessa's sentencing, I received my first letter from federal prison. It was shorter than her previous correspondence, written in the careful handwriting of someone who had learned that words have consequences. Dear Mother, I hope this letter finds you well and safe. I am writing to let you know that I have been participating in educational programs and counseling sessions designed to help inmates understand the impact of their crimes on victims and families. The work is difficult and often painful, but I am learning things about myself that I should have understood years ago. I want you to know that I think about you every day, not with expectation or demands for forgiveness, but with gratitude that you are safe and hope that you are finding peace. The other women here ask me about my family, and I tell them about a mother who was strong enough to choose justice over comfort, truth over lies, and the welfare of strangers over the feelings of a daughter who had betrayed her. I don't know if we will ever have a relationship again, but I want you to know that I am using this time to become someone worthy of the love you gave me for 32 years. Whether or not you ever want to see that person is entirely your choice. I love you more than I can express, and I am proud to be your daughter, even if you are no longer proud to have me as one. With all my love and respect, Vanessa. I read the letter sitting in Robert's study, surrounded by the evidence files he had compiled to protect me from dangers he'd seen coming before I even knew they existed. His photographs of David's criminal activities were now part of federal court records. His surveillance reports had helped convict a dozen conspirators. His careful planning had kept me alive and ultimately brought justice to people who thought they were untouchable. But most importantly, his love had given me the strength to choose truth over comfort when the choice mattered most. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a piece of stationery cream-colored paper with my initials embossed at the top, a gift from Robert on our 40th wedding anniversary. Dear Vanessa, I wrote, I received your letter, and I want you to know that I am proud of the work you are doing to understand and address the harm you caused. Growth and redemption are possible, but they require sustained effort and genuine commitment to change. You ask whether we will ever have a relationship again. I don't know the answer to that question. Trust once broken is not easily repaired. Love once betrayed doesn't simply return because the betrayer expresses remorse. But I have learned that people are capable of becoming better than they have been, and that choosing to become better is itself a form of love. I am not ready for visits or phone calls or the kind of relationship we had before you chose to betray me, but I am willing to correspond with you as you work toward becoming someone I could respect again. Consider this letter a first step on a very long journey. I hope you understand that forgiveness is not something I can simply decide to grant you. It is something that must be earned through sustained demonstration that you have become a person who would never again choose self-interest over family comfort, over conscience, or lies over truth. But I also want you to know that I believe such transformation is possible and that I hope you will achieve it. Your mother always, Margaret Hayes. I sealed the letter and addressed it to Federal Correctional Institution Danbury, where my daughter would spend the next 8 years learning to live with the consequences of her choices. 2 years later, I stood in the art studio I had built in the space that used to be Robert's study, putting the finishing touches on a painting that captured the view from our kitchen window, the rose garden he had planted for our anniversary now in full bloom under morning sunlight that seemed to make the colors more vivid than reality. The house had become mine in ways it never was before. Not just legally mine, not just financially mine, but emotionally mine, a place where I could remember the good times without being haunted by betrayal, where I could honor Robert's memory without being consumed by grief, where I could build a future that was entirely my own creation. I had started a foundation using part of Robert's estate, the Robert Hayes Foundation for Elder Protection, dedicated to educating seniors about financial fraud and providing legal assistance to elderly victims of family exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on me that my daughter's crimes had inspired a mission to protect other parents from suffering what I had endured. The foundation had grown beyond anything I had imagined. Offices in 12 states, a legal team that had recovered over $50 million in stolen assets for elderly victims, and an educational program that had reached thousands of seniors with information about protecting themselves from financial predators. The woman who had been targeted because of her vulnerability had become an advocate for others facing similar threats. My phone rang, interrupting my painting. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a familiar voice. Mrs. Hayes, this is Amanda Richards, the federal prosecutor who handled your daughter's case. Ms. Richards, how are you? I'm well, thank you. Mrs. Hayes, I'm calling because I wanted to let you know about something that happened yesterday. Vanessa testified in federal court against Anthony Marcelli, one of David's associates, who we weren't able to arrest during the original raids. I set down my paintbrush and sat in the chair that had replaced Robert's old desk. How did that go? She was extraordinary, calm, detailed, completely credible. Her testimony was crucial to securing Marcelli's conviction on money laundering and racketeering charges. Ms. Richards paused. Mrs. Hayes, in 20 years of prosecuting criminal cases, I've never seen a defendant demonstrate such sustained commitment to making amends for their crimes. What do you mean? Vanessa didn't have to testify against Marcelli. Her cooperation agreement was complete, her sentence was already finalized. But when we discovered Marcelli's location and needed a witness who could identify him and detail his role in the criminal organization, she volunteered immediately. She knew it would put her at additional risk in prison, but she said it was what her father would have expected her to do. I felt tears on my cheeks and realized I was crying not from sadness, but from something that felt almost like pride. Mrs. Hayes, I thought you should know that your daughter has become someone who chooses to do the right thing even when it costs her something. That's not common in my line of work. After Ms. Richards hung up, I sat in my art studio, surrounded by paintings that captured the life Robert and I had built together, thinking about the daughter who was slowly becoming someone I could respect again. She still had 6 years left on her sentence, 6 more years to demonstrate that her transformation was genuine and permanent. But for the first time since her arrest, I found myself looking forward to the person she might become when she was finally free. That evening, I wrote another letter. Dear Vanessa, I heard about your testimony against Anthony Marcelli. I want you to know that I am proud of your decision to continue cooperating with law enforcement, even when it was not required, and even when it put you at personal risk. I have been thinking about your question regarding whether we will ever have a relationship again. I still don't know the answer, but I am beginning to believe that the person you are becoming is someone I could learn to trust again. Not the blind trust I had before you betrayed me, but the careful, earned trust that comes from watching someone consistently choose to do the right thing over many years. I want to tell you about something I've been working on. I started a foundation in your father's name that helps elderly people protect themselves from financial fraud. The foundation has helped recover millions of dollars for seniors who were victimized by people like David and people like the person you used to be. The irony is not lost on me that your crimes inspired me to dedicate my life to preventing other families from experiencing what we went through. But I want you to know that every person we help, every dollar we recover, every criminal we help prosecute, it all stands as proof that even the most devastating betrayals can ultimately serve a purpose larger than the damage they cause. You chose to become a criminal. I chose to become an advocate. Both choices have defined who we became after Daddy died. But I believe it's possible for both of us to choose again and to choose better. I am not ready to visit you in prison, and I may never be. But I want you to know that I am watching your choices and that each good choice you make brings us slightly closer to the possibility of rebuilding something between us. Keep choosing to be better, Vanessa. Keep choosing justice over comfort, truth over convenience, other people's welfare over your own immediate interests. And someday, when you are free, we will see who you have become and whether she is someone I can love without fear. Your mother and growing prouder, Margaret Hayes. 3 years later, I received a call that changed everything. Mrs. Hayes, this is Warden Patricia Collins at FCI Danbury. I'm calling about your daughter, Vanessa Morrison. My blood went cold. Prison calls about inmates were never good news. What happened? Mrs. Hayes, I'm calling because your daughter just did something extraordinary, and I wanted you to hear about it from me directly rather than reading about it in the news. What kind of extraordinary? Yesterday evening, a fight broke out in the dining hall between two groups of inmates. One woman was severely injured and bleeding heavily from a head wound. While other inmates were either fighting or trying to get out of the way, your daughter administered first aid that very likely saved the woman's life. I sat down hard in Robert's old chair. Is everyone all right? The injured inmate is in stable condition at the hospital, largely because your daughter knew how to control bleeding and keep her conscious until medical help arrived. But Mrs. Hayes, there's more to the story. What do you mean, so? The woman your daughter saved is Maria Santos. She's the one who has been organizing harassment against your daughter since she arrived at Danbury. spreading rumors encouraging other inmates to ostracize her, making her life here as difficult as possible. I was speechless. Mrs. Hayes, your daughter had every reason to walk away from that situation. Maria Santos has made her 3 years here miserable, but when she saw someone who needed help, she didn't hesitate. She didn't consider their history or her personal feelings. She just acted to save a life. How is Vanessa? She's fine physically, but Mrs. Hayes, I've been running correctional institutions for 25 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened next. When the other inmates realized what your daughter had done, that she had saved the life of someone who had been tormenting her, the entire dynamic in this facility shifted. Maria Santos publicly apologized to your daughter and asked the other women to stop the harassment. Your daughter is now seen as someone with genuine integrity. I was crying again, overcome by pride and hope, and the recognition that the child I had raised, the one who had gotten so lost, was finally finding her way home. Warden Collins, thank you for calling. This means more to me than you can imagine. Mrs. Hayes, I've seen a lot of inmates come through here. Most of them serve their time and leave without fundamentally changing who they are, but your daughter is different. She's become a leader here, someone other women respect and turn to for guidance. She runs educational programs, mediates disputes, and consistently chooses to help others even when there's no benefit to herself. What are you telling me? I'm telling you that your daughter has become the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it, and I thought you should know. That night I sat in my rose garden under stars that seemed brighter than they had in years, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. 4 years ago, my daughter had been a criminal who tried to steal my home and leave me destitute. Now she was a woman who risked her own safety to save someone who had made her life miserable. People could change, redemption was possible, and real love could survive even the most devastating betrayals if both people were willing to work for it. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done since the day she'd been sentenced. I called the prison. This is Margaret Hayes. I'd like to schedule a visit with my daughter, Vanessa Morrison. Certainly, Mrs. Hayes. What day would work for you? I looked up at the stars, at Robert's roses blooming in moonlight, at the house where we had built our life together and where I was finally learning to live without him. As soon as possible, I said. It's time. 4.5 years after watching federal marshals arrest my daughter in my driveway, I sat in a prison visiting room, waiting to see her face to face for the first time since her sentencing. The room was institutional beige with plastic chairs and tables designed to prevent weapons from being concealed, but somehow it felt less sterile than the federal courthouse where we'd last spoken. When the door opened and Vanessa walked in, I barely recognized her. Not because she looked older or harder, but because she looked genuinely peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Her hair was shorter, graying at the temples, and she was thinner than I remembered, but her eyes were clear and direct, meeting mine without shame or calculation. Hello, Mother. Hello, sweetheart. We sat across from each other at a small table, both of us carefully maintaining the emotional distance that 4 years of separation had created, both of us aware that this conversation would determine whether we had a future together. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I wasn't sure you ever would. I wasn't sure either, but Warden Collins told me about what you did for Maria Santos, and I realized that the person you've become is someone I want to know. I've had a lot of time to think about who I was and who I wanted to become. Prison isn't the worst thing that ever happened to me, Mother. The worst thing was becoming someone you couldn't love. I never stopped loving you, Vanessa, but I did stop liking you. I stopped respecting you. I stopped trusting you. I know. And I've spent every day since my arrest trying to become someone you could trust again. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing 4 years of correspondence growth and gradual healing. Vanessa, I need you to understand something. Even if we rebuild our relationship, even if I learn to trust you again, things will never be the same as they were before. What you did to me changed something fundamental between us. I understand that, I don't expect to get back what I threw away, but I hope we can build something new, something based on who we are now rather than who we used to be. Who are you now? She smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked completely genuine. I'm someone who chooses to help people even when it costs me something. I'm someone who tells the truth even when lies would be easier. I'm someone who accepts responsibility for my actions without making excuses. She paused. I'm someone who loves her mother enough to spend the rest of her life earning back her respect. I reached across the table and touched her hand, the first physical contact we'd had since the day she'd kissed my cheek before being arrested. I'm proud of who you've become, I said, and I'm ready to see who you become next. We spent the next 2 hours talking about her work in prison, my foundation, the art I'd been painting, and the life I'd built from the wreckage of betrayal. We talked about Robert, about the evidence he'd left behind, about his final gift of protection that had saved both our lives. We talked about the future, her release in 18 months, her plans for rebuilding her life, her hope that we might be part of each other's lives again. When visiting hours ended, we stood facing each other across 4 years of pain and growth and gradual healing. Mother, will you come back? Yes, I said without hesitation. I'll come back. Even though I'm still in prison, even though I haven't proven yet that I can make good choices in the real world, because you're still in prison, because you're using this time to become better instead of just serving your sentence, because you saved someone who had made your life miserable not for reward or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. 18 months later, I stood in the same prison parking lot, but this time I was waiting for Vanessa to walk out as a free woman. She emerged carrying a single bag containing everything she owned, looking around at the outside world like someone seeing sunlight for the first time in years. We drove back to the house in relative silence, both of us aware that this was the real test, not whether she could be a good person in prison, but whether she could continue making good choices when she had complete freedom again. It looks exactly the same, she said as we pulled into the driveway of the home she'd once tried to steal from me. Some things are the same, some things are different. I turned off the car and looked at her. The most important thing that's different is that now it's genuinely my choice to have you here. We went inside together, mother and daughter, victim and perpetrator, two women who had been destroyed by betrayal and slowly rebuilt by truth. The grandfather clock was still ticking in the living room, marking time that had healed wounds I'd thought were permanent. The rose garden Robert had planted for our anniversary was blooming outside the kitchen window, more beautiful than ever after years of careful tending. Vanessa, I want to show you something, I said, leading her to what used to be Robert's study and was now my art studio. The walls were covered with paintings, landscapes, portraits, still lifes that captured moments of beauty I'd learned to see again after believing that betrayal had destroyed my capacity for joy. But in the center of the room was a single painting that made her stop and stare. It was a portrait of her as a child, 8 years old, with chocolate cake on her face and a gap-toothed smile, the little girl who had once promised to love me forever. I painted this last year, I said, to remind myself that the child I raised was real even when she seemed lost forever. Vanessa was crying, staring at the painting that captured a version of herself she'd thought was dead. Do you think she's still in there somewhere? I think she grew up and made terrible mistakes and hurt people she loved, but I also think she found her way back to the values that child was raised with. I put my arm around my daughter for the first time in 5 years. I think she's right here. That evening, we sat in the living room where our family had been destroyed and began the slow process of building something new, not the naive trust we'd had before, not the blind love that had made me vulnerable to betrayal, but something stronger, a relationship built on truth, earned respect, and the recognition that love, real love, can survive even the most devastating betrayals if both people are willing to work for it. Mother, Vanessa said as we watched the sunset through the windows that looked out on Robert's roses, I know I can never undo what I did to you, but I want to spend whatever time we have left making sure you never regret giving me this second chance. I don't believe in undoing the past, I said, but I do believe in creating a better future. And I believe the best revenge against those who betrayed us isn't destroying them, it's becoming everything they never believed we could be. And the grandfather clock chimed 9 times, marking another hour in the life Robert and I had built together, the life I'd thought was over when grief made me vulnerable, the life that had ultimately been saved by truth, courage, and the recognition that some principles are more important than peace. I was Margaret Hayes. I was a woman who had been betrayed by her own daughter, who had chosen justice over comfort, who had built something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. I was a mother who had learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all, and that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. But most importantly, I was a woman who had discovered that the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who wrong you, it's becoming everything they never believed you could be, and then choosing to love them anyway when they finally become worthy of that love. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.